Game Heroes is a Zelda game created by Silicon Studio in 2009. It was published by From Software in Japan, with Atlas and South Peak Games distributing it in North America and Europe, respectively, the following year. At the time of release, it was $40 or $50 depending on where you were from, which is important to highlight as this thing really doesn't do enough to warrant a full retail price tag as far as I'm concerned. The game relies heavily on gimmicks and referential humor, which is all fine if you dig its comedic tone or rehashed ideas, but those who don't may find it bland or off-putting. Obviously, humor is subjective, so everyone's going to have their own takeaway here. Personally, I find it distracting, repetitive, and downright cringy at times. It prefers the sledgehammer approach rather than the occasional wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Snap, snap, grin, grin, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more. Know what I mean? Know what I mean? Nudge, nudge, know what I mean? Say no more.
The subtler moments are kinda cute, such as the old man inventor named Deke Dyke Dick, who offers an early game item in Dr. Light Mega Man 2 style, but that's an example of a tidy, low-key, one-off joke. The Lego-style reinterpretations of box art and scenes from other games that appear during loading screens also work for me. Doom, Space Harrier, a myriad of square references, great stuff. Subdued, dry humor is more my speed, but for every little reference like this, there seems to be a dozen others that are so broad, so juvenile, that they land with a thud. Every sexual gag repulsed me, and a lot of the references to other video games or pop culture feel as forced as a mid-90s Working Designs translation. There's a lot to enjoy here, but the writing just isn't one of them. The derivative, on-the-nose tone really dates this thing. I mean, there's a reason we identify with the references, and that's because they are pulled from timeless classics. Ultimately, the humor here is somewhere between satire, homage, and parody. On the other hand, if you fall into the majority who enjoy Easter eggs in their media, the remember-whens that are all over television and movies of late, this might appeal to you. If we look at it from that angle, 3D Game Heroes was ahead of its time. I, on the other hand, find it lazy across the board and brazenly manipulative. Movies, television shows, video games, I can't stand it. Silicon Studio also decided to crib some of the more annoying bits from other titles. The earliest example being Lee, a fairy companion who constantly interrupts gameplay to over-explain every little thing. Granted, these tips are helpful in one or two instances, specifically in the latter half's Wind Dungeon, where I was informed that a shield could somehow in some way block gusts of air, but this valuable information could have been scribbled on a signpost, a wall, or dictated by an NPC at some point. There are dead soldiers in every temple. Maybe they could have written it out Dead Space style before they perished, instead of merely being used as more gag fodder. Lee can be used as the prime example of the wit, or at least half of it, that permeates this experience. Is their sole purpose to annoy the player? Are we taking the piss out of Ocarina of Time here? Why would you borrow something as infamous as Navi from that game? The "hey, listen" gag was played out even by 2009, so what are we even doing here? Whether Lee was implemented as an earnest guide or not really isn't my question. It's why they would add a companion that is as irritating as Navi when it had already long since been established that the fairy was a joke to begin with. In Ocarina of Time, there was a reason for them to exist as an aid for players who were perhaps struggling with the franchise's transition to 3D. In this game, there's not a lot to learn, because almost everything it is has been done before.
That's just more than I want to deal with.
The whole 2D, 3D thing is the crux of this game's story. Basically, everything was pixelated in Dotnia, a 2D world before the king deemed sprites to be outdated. This resulted in he decreeing that his land would enter the age of 3D. The rest is a link to the past. A dark king named Onyx, 6 magical orbs protected by sages, elemental dungeon themes. It's a Zelda game. At the beginning, you take control of a hero who places a sword in a stone through a nice introduction sequence. It's a good setup, but I think think it would have had a more substantial impact if we were to experience this before the advent of 3D in an old-school 8-bit visual style. Huge overlooked opportunity here as far as I'm concerned, and one that would have landed better overall, since you're forced to retrace these steps a few moments later as the new adventurer. Not only would this have been more clever, but it also might have made this light tutorial section feel less repetitive. 3D Game Heroes relies so heavily on its gimmicks that it rarely gives itself the opportunity to think outside the box. Granted, it restricts itself within these parameters voluntarily, but I think relying so heavily on nostalgia hurts rather than helps. In a lot of ways, I believe these developers couldn't see the forest for the trees, so obsessed with humorous ways to reference other properties that they completely overlooked setting their own project apart with interesting, memorable moments. I suppose one could argue that it does so with its blatant admiration for games of yore, but throughout my many playthroughs, I was constantly asking myself, is this enough? So far, I've been pretty harsh and have likely alienated all fans of this thing, but truthfully, I really do enjoy certain aspects of 3D Game Heroes. For one, it's absolutely stunning to look at. Its tilt-shift photography style is unique. All of the buildings, creatures, and environments leap off the screen with colorful clarity. Nearly everything appears to have been built with Lego-style bricks, and there are times when it feels as though I'm peering into a diorama, specifically in Dotnia's many towns where the denizens move around their set paths between shops. The water, fire, and other elemental effects are outstanding, harsh, contrasting accents to the otherwise blocky landscapes. Realistic shadows are cast on temple walls, and the lighting overall is spectacular. Reflective surfaces, faintly lit interiors, the glistening sun off rivers and lakes. Wonderful presentation all around. It's a beautiful game that comes complete with a hefty manual. Oh, the good old days when physical products came packed with something more substantial than a black and white leaflet or a download code. Would you just look at this thing? I want to rub it all over my body. Using the absurdly huge swords to wipe out enemies never gets old, and the way our hero twirls then locks in place while casting a spell as the camera zooms in is so entertaining to watch. Almost everything is customizable. Text speed, different camera angles to experiment with on the overworld, a hint system toggle, tons of save options, the ability to swap out playable protagonists upon loading up a new existing file. One of the biggest draws is how it's possible to create your own characters and share them. A robust feature that I'm doing a horrible job showcasing, as building has never been my idea of fun in any game, but it's here, and it's great. Bestiaries, a relatively basic quest log, secrets that range from simply delivering goods like any other good little RPG errand hero to complex, obtuse puzzles, a snapshot mode. There are things to discover everywhere, and while the main adventure may only take a player 8 or so hours to complete, those who get off exploring every single square inch of a game will definitely get their money's worth. The problem I have when it comes to wandering around is that most of the smaller activities are time-sensitive fetch quests, making them frequently tough to track, and nearly impossible to follow without a guide. For some, this could be a positive, as it encourages replayability after the end credits. Lengthy fetch quests just aren't for me though, and the majority found within Dotnia require warping or darting all over the map from one town to the next, delivering one thing to this NPC, then to another, all the way over there. If I had to break it down, I'd say a quarter or maybe a third of the game is the main linear quest, while the rest is made up of Majora's Mask style bits of meaningful hidden weapon and item upgrades sprinkled throughout. It's busy work, but again, if that's your thing, this might be the adventure for you. I'm the type of person who likes to be dropped into a world. The least amount of chit-chat, the better. Just dump me in and let me figure it all out. I know plenty of people, my partner included, who love exploring every nook and cranny to receive that 100% completion bonus. For me, if those secrets are along the path, I'll get them. Hell, I'm a huge Quake fan and will canvas those combat arenas all day to unlock everything. But if you're expecting me to talk to a billion NPCs, I'm just out, dude, you know? Different strokes for different folks. In a lot of ways, 3D Game Heroes has the landscape and dungeon design of Zelda 1 with story elements ripped from A Link to the Past and the Postal Service style fetch quests of Majora's Mask all in one package. I think we've bludgeoned it over the head that this is less an homage than straight up theft, but let's do what this PS3 exclusive does best by hammering it home. even more. NPCs say stuff that is straight up from Zelda. Temples have their own unique gimmicks, but they mostly comprise of key and block puzzles with the occasional dark room tossed in for good measure. A powerful sword in a ghost-inhabited graveyard can be found later in the journey by pushing a tombstone. Dash boots, hook shot, boomerang, bombable walls complete with cracks, a fire rod, a spell that reflects magic back at wizards a la Zelda 2. I'll stop right there with the items because you get the idea. So blatant. Even the enemies are rehashed, but let's be fair. Mummies, bats, octopi creatures, skeletons, these are staples in most adventure titles, but moblins and lionels, I mean, come on. Red and blue block switches, this boss, that boss. It'd be fine if there were like a few dozen big bads in this game, but there are only a handful. I could make an entire video of everything 3D Game Heroes lifts from that Nintendo series, but you get the idea. Imitation might be the sincerest form of flattery, but a professional studio releasing something this brazenly exact is a bit embarrassing and creatively bankrupt in my opinion. I've reviewed tons of Zelda copycat games on this channel. Golden Axe Warrior is a prime example, an unapologetically similar adventure for the Sega Master System that is clearly aping the original NES classic, but it expands on that title's limited design in a few substantial ways. Darksiders is another series I enjoy immensely, despite some of its douchebag dude bro idiosyncrasies. A franchise that borrows heavily from 3D Zelda titles as well as God of War, Dark Souls, and Diablo, to name a few. It's okay to wear those inspirations on your sleeve, but when things are this identical, it leaves me questioning your values. Again, some might reach the tippy top of this fire mountain, see this half-man, half-horse beast, and be wonderfully surprised. It's a Lionel! I remember that from Zelda. I rolled my entire eye-filled face and groaned out loud. No joke, it was like that part in Ghostbusters Afterlife with the chocolate bar in Egon's suit. Ugh. Tangentially, Axiom Verge is a perfect example of a very derivative work of art done correctly. It's immediately evident that this is Metroid on the NES, but after a while it started surprising me. New, clever gimmicks and items roll out that changed the way I expected to get around obstacles. Phasing through the environments is a fresh take, and this little gizmo gadget can be hurled out to solve puzzles. This proves to me that it's okay to stick very close to your influences while also expanding on them. And I mean, you know, why the hell not? While I'm sitting atop my soapbox yammering on, let's briefly touch on Proteus. No, not the Konami-crafted parody series Parodius, though that suits this topic as well, but Proteus. At first glance, it appears to be nothing but a boomer shooter cashing in on the resurgence of the Doom franchise after 2016 and Eternal. In execution, it plays a lot more like an homage to source ports based off of the 1993 masterpiece. It also has one of the most clever stages I've played in any first-person shooter.
With it. Yes, get on with it!
Is your wife a goer? Hey, know what I mean? Know what I mean? Nudge, nudge, know what I mean? Say no more. Is your wife a goer? Hey, know what I mean? Know what I mean? Nudge, nudge, know what I mean? Say no more. Is your wife a goer? Hey, know what I mean? Know what I mean? Nudge, nudge, know what I mean? Say no more.
They've got to be taking the piss out of working designs here, right? Like, I mean, at least I hope. 3D Game Heroes doesn't explore the potential of being a Zelda clone enough for my liking, and I think that's why it isn't as memorable to me. Traversing the land of Dotnia has never felt quite right. For an adventure game, it's very linear with strict paths to follow. Sure, you can explore a bit for upgrades and occasionally get into trouble wandering off on your own, but for the most part, you're gated until a dungeon item opens the next overworld chunk. I understand why games do this. Corralling players from A to B allows developers to drip feed new items and events gradually, simultaneously being able to track their progress while preventing them from getting lost. It also makes it tougher to break or exploit a game and creates a more inviting experience for the majority. The challenge ramps up gradually as opposed to irregular spikes spikes in difficulty throughout. I love A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, and Wind Waker despite the changes made to the open world formula established in the first series entry, but after a while I started to realize just how restrictive they were, only getting worse with each new entry until the masterpiece that is Breath of the Wild brought things back. Golden Axe Warrior, Newtopia, Alundra, Crusader of Senti are all examples that follow that 16-bit Zelda pattern of opening new areas up in chunks. 3D Dot Game Heroes does the same. I've brought this up numerous times in other videos, but being cordoned off makes me feel claustrophobic. Whenever I brought this up in the past, there were always two egregious examples that popped into my mind. This and Alundra. Everything is so tight, and the way forward feels more like a narrow maze. Specifically here, the paths leading up to the final two main quest dungeons. The Fire Temple is atop a mountain where the player is expected to complete navigational puzzles while being dunked on by gigantic boulders. I can't stand this region for how obnoxious it all is, but there also really aren't any secrets to discover here either, outside of a few arduous fetch quests. The path forward isn't all that tricky to figure out, but it's also rigid. Here's the icing on the lava-covered shitcake, so buckle up. There's a collectible ruby up here, not far from the temple. It's required to infuse the magic shield with fire protection, right next to the fire cave that took you a bit of time to reach. To get the upgrade, one must have spoken to a man who inhabits an inn at the bottom of the mountain first, then bring the rock down. A perk that offers a shield upgrade to fight fire outside the flamey red temple. You get it? Grasshoppers, wind wings, allow quick travel to friendly towns and inns, so returning isn't really an issue, but once the shield has been upgraded, you'll need to reach the peak again. Busy work. Poorly planned. It's horribly executed backtracking with zero respect for the player's time. This is only a drop in the ocean of events that play out in this manner. The intended temple to take on next has an equally linear path to follow, this time with elevated terrain and narrow cliff sides to navigate through in a desert. There are open areas here to battle it out with enemies, but reaching the objective is needlessly burdensome. It feels like padding. Instead of concocting an interesting series of events or cleverer ideas, these developers seemed more than satisfied forcing players through meaningless, meandering mazes to reach specific regions. Exploring an overworld is what draws me into adventure games. There's very little going on here outside of time-sensitive fetch quests. There are secrets to discover, but it's all hampered by the claustrophobic, entangled terrain. Upon defeating a boss, the temple's sage spells out where to go next, but reaching these destinations is needlessly annoying. I prefer my mazes relegated to dungeons. Having to solve them constantly is exhausting. Not difficult, just exhausting. It's a good thing the first 6 temples are so good. Conceptually, Silicon Studios isn't really breaking any new ground with these. Each of the half a dozen temples apes a familiar Zelda trope. Grass, forest, desert, water, fire, wind. We've seen it all before, and while 3D Dot Game Heroes doesn't do anything too creative with these themes, it still manages to impress with some of the most intricately designed puzzle boxes in the genre. The first 2 are expectedly easy. Push some blocks, gather some common keys, as well as a boss door variant, grab a map, collect an item, and defeat a big bad. Apples replace heart containers, which are dropped upon completion of a dungeon. Chat with a sage who rewards us with a new spell, rinse and repeat. Outside of this magic system that the player is expected to make use of in future labyrinths, there's nothing new here. Still, the way these places are laid out is damn tight. Starting with the 3rd temple, the player can expect to navigate multiple floors. Think the Ice Palace from A Link to the Past and how it forced vertical exploration through holes in the floors, or some of the later dungeons in the original Zelda where a variety of items needed to be used in order to access every room. Keys are tucked away off the beaten path in some instances, so a bit of memorization is required. The maps found within are easy to read, with clear symbols replacing the need for a compass, but perhaps a bit too much is spelled out for the player. Many floors that lie within these dark, dank environments should keep even the most experienced dungeon crawlers occupied. Tack on the aggressive enemies that lie within, and you have a modern facsimile of an 8-bit Nintendo game. I have 2 minor nitpicks. Plummeting through holes occasionally situates your hero atop a baddie with zero chance to react, and obstacles can be tricky to identify due to the forced camera angle in these areas. Take this room for instance. It's tough to see the path between these blocks due to the perspective, and sometimes enemies can be tough to hit, or even see, which brings up an issue I have with the design as a whole. Okay, so this is the default visual setting. It looks nice, but simply isn't a practical camera angle for action most of the time. I prefer this option, which isn't as pretty but allows me to view more of the environment. Customization is cool. View, 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 view. Combat is a mixed bag regardless of the camera angle. When your little buddy is at anything less than full health, the sword is shorter, narrower, and tougher to line up with foes. On paper, this is a reasonable debuff, and I've always appreciated games that penalize players for their mistakes, but oftentimes the hit detection feels a bit wonky. Admittedly, I've always had problems aiming in isometric games, and I'm not saying this is an isometric game, I'm just saying that this has an inherently weirder perspective no matter the angle, but I swear sometimes things just don't line up. Of course, the glib solution is to just get good to ensure your weapon never goes flaccid, but realistically, this is easier said than done. I'd like to posit that the developers added the insanely large sword gimmick to incentivize a lazier playstyle. At full health, it requires next to no skill to operate, and alleviates the noticeable flaws in lining up attacks. This is only speculation, and I'm probably wrong, but I've been playing all sorts of games since the 80s, and somehow that matters, but sometimes I swear my sword just isn't connecting when it should. These things can be upgraded to reach the entirety of a screen. Long, thick, powerful tweaks can be made to most with the aid of any of Dotnia's many blacksmiths, but these buffs rarely work when the sword is below full power. With my conspiratorial views aside, these weapons are a blast to use. Rotating their direction to do damage around corners is as exhilarating as it is unique. To annihilate an entire screen's worth of minions in one fell swoop, it's just long, thick.
Say no more, now to me, nudge, nudge.
Apple fragments are placed everywhere, with plenty being rewarded after fetch quests. 4 of the red ones extend the life bar because Zelda, and green ones offer more magic slots. It's probably important to fill a few bottles with restorative elixirs before entering late game temples. Enemies hit hard, and some require spells to eliminate, such as these magi, who are half Wizrobe and half Adventure of Link casters that can't be harmed unless you bounce their projectiles back at them. They always drop green apples when defeated, which makes them a great source for mid-dungeon mana farming, and such a cool concept all around. Easily my favorite enemy in the game. Bombs are bombs, nothing special, but as I've said in other videos, I always prefer an unmarked wall rather than a cracked one, yada yada. It's not a secret if it's clearly marked out, it's just another gate to halt progression, yada yada. Arrows now have a vertical arc, which is great as it forces the player to be more strategic with their placement on any given screen to land a hit. The fire rod burns down withered old tree stumps, something I've been missing since the first Zelda game. Speaking of tree stumps, King's Field enemies appear occasionally. Tree stumps, golems, demons' souls, an entire cave is devoted to it, and From Software as a whole. Sticky white stuff got in her hair. From's Cum Cave is an interesting place with a nifty little side mission that doesn't require bouncing all over the goddamn map, where a dude who wants to make a 3D mech game, Armored Core, builds an army of developers the more you speak to him. This is the kind of humor I can get behind. It's crazy that both of these games were released the same year, though again, From Software didn't develop this thing, so there's that. Items can be swapped with the triggers, which is glorious. They get automatically assigned when picked up, but are easily toggled from the menu screen. Here's a nitpick. When attempting to cycle through gear from this very Ocarina of Time looking layout, it always defaults the cursor to the left, which is irritating because I use the D-pad to cycle through items and almost always end up viewing my weapons because they didn't think to disable page turns with the directional buttons. Bumpers existed in 2009. Figure it out. Secret blocks can be found and traded for new weapons and gear. So many swords to discover for adventurous types. Multiple endings. Optional fairies can be found to juice up that finale, but no spoilers. Everyone should try this game out for themselves. That is, if you don't mind paying the inflated price for the physical copy these days, because Sony be Sony, and Jim Ryan doesn't care about you or your appreciation for old games.
That's all I'm gonna say on that.
Crowned enemies are better, stronger, faster. Do you want to fight those old bosses again? Well, you can. Just disturb their resting place like the 3D dickwad you are. Let's go! In all honesty, the big bads are pretty cool, borrowed from Zelda, yes, but also better in almost every way, with excellent opening cinematics, telegraphed movements, and wide open rooms that allow for experimentation. Some even have secret vulnerabilities. Just look at these action set pieces. They're awesome. Candles are single-use items and the visual effect is beautiful, but psst, hey, lanterns are better, so invest in them. Blocking with a shield requires a manual input, which was a bit tricky for me to get used to at first, but doing so also locks you into a specific direction. Sure, it's possible to still walk, slowly, but it opens up a whole new world of tactical defensive strategies. Of course, Silicon Studio barely takes advantage of this, but it's there. Slates show secrets, a cool reason to use the first distributed magic spell. Stone tablets give hints or to mock you depending on the temple, in case Lee wasn't irritating enough. Let's pause these rapid fire facts right here. The sages. Alright, so the first one can be found while collecting the magical mystery orb. Reasonable enough. The second is out front. Too terrified to enter, sensible, admirable, realistic. Others just bail and need to be tracked down because this game wants to be longer than it truly is, so you'll need to scour surrounding towns to find them. Lame. The only mandatory fetch quest style sequence forces you to revisit most temples, which is admittedly not too bad, as there are warp points that can be manually activated before each boss door leading to the entrance to each, but it's still unnecessary padding. It also confirms my earlier notion that these events weren't designed by cognizant humans with any respect or knowledge of what makes a side mission engaging. I also question how well optimized this game is. I've never experienced a stutter or bug, but some of the load times between regions on the gridded map feel a bit too long. They break up the flow, and while I can appreciate the snappy camera angle options this game has to account for, they kind of ruin my rhythm. Am I nitpicking? Probably, but these little details still bother me, and is there anything worse than someone who asks questions to themselves only to answer them? Obnoxious. Dashing is awful, it straight up sucks. Colliding with every Lego mountain or elevated terrain is the name of the game here if you decide to dart in any given direction with a fully erect sword. Fortunately, your Swift Santa, or whatever goofy assembly of colorful blocky bits, moves around swiftly, so getting around rarely incentivizes the dash mechanic. Smash, 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 smash. Colored keys are hidden all over Dotania, as is an extremely tough to track down super variant which enables the players to enter all green, red, and blue doors in the game. These gates contain some of the most powerful weapons and items, but also enable you to track down a few hidden secrets to unlock a better ending. They're purchasable from a specific vendor at a hefty price, but can also be located through natural exploration. A lot, if not all, temples include secret rooms to put these pickups to good use as well, with rewards ranging from extremely valuable to downright lackluster. I touched on this briefly, but the getting around flat out sucks. Most areas contain a lot of dead ends, but some require leaps of faith down to lower terrain. It's easy to overlook the cliff edges that one can vault from, which is a problem that only gets worse. Sometimes it feels like the developers were more interested in screwing the player over, forcing them to backtrack in lieu of competent level design. If anything, it just turns me off. While we're on the topic of environmental hazards and the layout of the land, we might as well address the quicksand, or rather the airport-style moving sidewalk traps in the desert. These are terrible conveyor belts that strip all control from the player. Basically, you're expected to view the direction in which these things travel, hop on, and let them take you to the next location. It's not so bad because, I mean, you can kind of tell where they are because they're between cacti or boulders, but as I keep saying, stuff like this just isn't challenging or inventive. It's just irritating, and I would love to shake my fists at the person or group of people who came up with this idea. Piss off. Don't take control away from me. Ever. There are a few mini games to play with different tiers for each. Dash Circuit sucks. It's a trial and error time waster that forces you to run around courses like an asshole. Memorization is the name of the game here, and I've always sucked at stuff like this, so fuck you. Tower Defense is kinda cool, maybe, to some people. It's all well and good until the camera angle jacks things up and I start hemorrhaging coins. Better than Dash Circuit, but not by much. Breakout is my jam. I'll play any clone of this I can get my hands on except for this one, because again, the weird pivoted perspective forces mistakes I'd rarely make and more competently crafted clones of this wonderfully exquisite game. It's cool that these distractions are here, even if none of them are for me.
Hey, fuck you.
Rapid fire number 3, low health beeping, is something else that could have been left with Lee in the same dumpster. It might sound less abrasive than old school video games, but it's still here. Just get rid of it. Some things are just not a good idea to copy. The default setting displays a garish black bar at the bottom with reminders of the buttons of what they do. They can be easily hidden in the options menu, but what are they even doing here in the first place? The HUD is so large already. Sleeping bags, tents, camp, anywhere. Why not? Except for here, because why would you want to camp near the End Palace? Inns are for suckers and result in bad dreams occasionally. What is even going on here? The final temple straight up sucks. It forces the player to wander through facsimiles of previous dungeons only to face ramped up versions of each and every big bad, a boss rush, in 2009, which is honestly the laziest way any developer could ever design the finale of any game. Uncreative, bland padding after a sequence that apes the pivotal moment in A Link to the Past. We've experienced all of this before. This is the PS3 in 2009, make more enemies. It's redundant. There are several composers here, normally I'd say the names, but this is just easier. The music is nothing less than superb, with the desert and wind temple themes being my personal favorites. As expected, there are quite a few tracks that rely a bit too heavily on other pieces, homage, parody, ripoff, you can be the judge while playing. Ultimately, I enjoy the majority of the tunes here, outside of a couple freaky little ditties that increase my anxiety. There's a weird sort of bleep bloop style going on across the board that I can definitely get behind, and it's clear that these composers understood what they were doing. It would have been nice if they weren't forced to recreate a sense of nostalgia, but as I keep stating, it's probably a me problem, and this is a solid soundtrack that stands on its own legs. 3D Dot Game Heroes is fine. It's not my thing all the time, but deserves a lot more recognition for its inner temple puzzle design and gimmicky eccentricities. I play through it at least once every few years and get annoyed with it for all the reasons I complained about in this review. If you can find it for under $60, I'd say give it a shot. Anything more than that is a ripoff, unless you enjoy needlessly cumbersome fetch quests and sloppy design decisions. It's not as annoying as people who feel the need to argue as to whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza, YouTubers who consistently remind viewers to like, comment, and subscribe, or self-appointed foodies who feel the need to preface every single internet recipe with their entire life story before getting to the point, but it's not far off. This has been my opinion. Feel free to get enraged. Honestly, that says more about you than me. Maybe get a helmet. Next time, we'll be taking a look at a proper From Software game, finishing up a series we started many moons ago, so stay tuned. Hello and welcome to another episode of Culinary Cookery. My name is Francine and I'm a foodie. Before we get started, be sure to ring that bell so you can be notified when we release a new video. Like, comment, and subscribe. Consider becoming a patron. Today we'll be focused on me. I'm a foodie who has never been formally trained, but I've watched enough cooking videos to unabashedly claim to be a chef. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Let's try to reach that goal of 36 subscribers by the end of the month. If you'd like to become a member, our Patreon will be listed all over the screen, as well as in the description down below. Curry has always been a favorite of mine, and what goes with curry better than some fresh, homemade naan bread? I, Francine, know how to create the ultimate doughy bread to get all of your guests begging for more. A reminder that patrons all get to see their name at the end of each video, scrolling by quickly in a tiny font, because all of my supporters are special. We'd also like to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe for hourly updates. Ring that bell for tons of scrumptious recipes every day. I love you so much. We're strangers, but I mean it. Would you like to create the ultimate naan recipe, the ultimate curry? Do friends make you happy? When I was a child, there was a dense forest behind our house where I'd forage for peppers and mushrooms. Sometimes I'd add them to my stews. I always had a creative mind filled with brilliant ideas. Curry is the food of warmth and love. So on my 17th birthday, I was gifted everything needed to build my own culinary empire. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In grade 8, I learned to sing. Me, 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 me. The errand boy who delivered groceries to our home would serve our forest abode last, so he could play piano while watching us eat curry. Could you believe his parents didn't have the money to buy him his own keys? I gave him some naan bread for free because I'm so wonderful. Go fund me, please, for them keys. Sometimes we'd have strawberries, but mostly it was all about curries, naans, palak paneers. Me, 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 me. Curry, the warm broth, the complex stew, savory, sweet flavors that will remind you of your first love. Maybe a bit spicy if you'd like. Frisky devil, yum, 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 noshing on those hot heat eastern peppers. Naughty like my first partner back in college who would tape my mouth shut before long drives out to the canyon where I'd be tricked out of the car to seek out dinner mushrooms for our curry foods. Of course, I'd always find my way back because I'm a chef foodie internet YouTuber. Tell your friends, family, children, children's children, godchildren, children's friends, children, and partners about Francine the Foodie. We can be found everywhere. Don't fret. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on Twitch, Twitter, MySpace, TikTok, FetLife, YouTube, Tinder, Cinder, Instagram, and Snapchat. Leave flyers everywhere you go. Click that bell, thumb everything up, and join our Patreon. We love you all. For this naan recipe, you'll need something nice and big to cook it in. And for this curry, you will need something nice and big to cook it in, which reminds me of that time I visited a department store where they had a big old 18-liter stainless steel pot for $17.94. That's less than $1 per liter, and for the price of just a cup of coffee, you could make my dreams come true. We're all struggling, but if you could find it in your heart to pay me to reach my hopes and aspirations, you'll be thanked. After all, not everyone gets their name tossed into the minuscule text scroll at the end of every video. Are you with me? There's no need to skip lunches next week after sending me half an hour's worth of your minimum wage salary because I'm here to fulfill my life while teaching you how to save on groceries. Next time, we'll be live streaming on this channel. Donate if you can, and by if I mean because you'll be losing valuable money not donating to this incredible content. Don't you want the chance to hear your name said aloud by me, Francine the Foodie? Me, 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 me. I just love to sing, but I'm not your dancing monkey. I'm Francine the Foodie, and here are 2 of my recipes. Get all your ingredients out, but don't be one of those impure pizza punks. Leave the pineapple in the fridge. Pineapple has no place in a curry or on a pizza. Toss this in there, pour it in a bowl, done.